Welcome to the Explainer. So if you've ever looked out at nature and just wondered how wildly different organisms actually manage to survive and thrive against all the odds, well, you're in the exact right place. Just think about the sheer extremes we see out there for a second. On one hand, you've got a mayfly, right? An insect that lives its entire adult life in this frantic 24-hour window. And then on the absolute other extreme, you have the giant tortoise, just slowly plodding along, surviving for well over 150 years. How do those vastly different timelines both equal success? Well, today, we're opening up the ultimate biological rulebook. We're going to explore this fascinating topic of life history variation and uncover the exact, highly calculated strategies that organisms use to basically win the highest-stakes game on Earth, the game of survival.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for decoding the natural world today. We'll kick things off with Section 1, the ultimate goal of life. Then we'll look at one-time versus repeat breeders in Section 2. Next up is Section 3, the great offspring trade-off, followed by Section 4, what shapes these strategies. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with Section 5, why this matters today.
But first, I want to start by posing this really profound question directly to you. What is the ultimate strategy for survival? I mean, it seems like a simple question on the surface, doesn't it? But actually, it's this incredibly complex puzzle that literally every single species on the planet has been trying to solve for millions of years of evolutionary history. Is it better to be fast or slow? To have hundreds of offspring or just a few carefully protected ones? Keep that question in the back of your mind, because as you'll see, nature absolutely refuses to provide just one right answer.
All right. Let's get into Section 1, the ultimate goal of life, and what it really means to win the evolutionary game. To really wrap our heads around biology, we have to recognize that every species on Earth, no matter how weird or wonderful, is fundamentally facing the exact same universal problem. They all have to figure out how to successfully grow, survive, and reproduce in a world full of relentless challenges. And the way they solve this problem? It's through what we call Darwinian fitness. Now, this is the concept where organisms adopt differing patterns of growth and reproduction to increase their overall reproductive success. But wait, this isn't just about surviving day to day. Darwinian fitness is strictly 100% about your genetic legacy. An organism could live a super long, healthy life, but if it never passes its genes to the next generation, its evolutionary fitness is effectively zero. So life history variation is simply the term we use to describe these differing patterns. It's the unique combination of traits, developmental timelines, and reproductive schedules a species evolves over millennia to maximize that Darwinian fitness and guarantee their genes make it to tomorrow.
Now, what's really interesting here is a critical metric we use to measure this underlying potential, called the R value. When we talk about reproductive fitness, the R value is absolutely foundational. You can kind of think of it as a species' ultimate biological engine operating under perfect ideal conditions. Just imagine a scenario where a species has completely unlimited food, zero predators, and absolutely zero disease. The R value measures the absolute biological limit of how fast that population could grow and multiply under those perfect conditions. Now, obviously, perfect conditions never last in the real world, right? But this baseline is totally vital. Every single evolutionary strategy we are about to discuss is essentially a different way a species has evolved to harness, invest, and deploy this R-value potential to beat the odds.
Moving right along to Section 2, one-time versus repeat breeders, placing your evolutionary bets.
Now that we know the ultimate goal, we can see how different species place their evolutionary bets. Because reproductive strategies are incredibly diverse, they reflect completely unique evolutionary paths. Broadly speaking, scientists categorize how organisms invest their biological growth potential into two wildly distinct strategies. Think of simulparity as the blockbuster movie release approach to reproduction. These organisms reproduce only once in their entire lifetime. They basically hoard all their energy over months or even years, and then trigger a single massive explosion of reproduction. The physiological toll of this strategy is so absolute that they literally convert their own vital body mass into reproductive energy, which means they invariably die shortly after breeding. It's a total all-or-nothing gamble. Now, the completely opposite approach is interparity. This is way more like a long-running TV series. These species reproduce multiple times throughout their life cycle. They reserve enough bodily resources to actually survive the reproductive event, allowing for a much more consistent, steady output of offspring over time and across lots of different seasons.
To see this in action, let's look at some incredible examples from our source material. For simulparity, just consider the dramatic life cycle of the Pacific salmon. These fish undergo this grueling one-way journey, swimming hundreds of miles upstream, battling rushing rapids, entirely stopping their food intake, and evading predators like bears.
They literally burn out their bodies entirely to ensure their massive clutch of eggs is laid, perishing immediately after just to become nutrients for the very stream their young will hatch in. It's a massive, high-volume terminal event. For iteroparity, we are talking about most birds and mammals. Picture a deer raising a single fawn in the spring. The mother invests heavily in that one fawn, but she ensures her own survival so she can reproduce again the following spring, and the spring after that. The volume of offspring at any one time is low, but the legacy is built steadily over a much longer period.
This introduces a pretty fascinating dilemma, which brings us to Section 3, the great offspring trade-off, quality versus quantity.
Now you might be wondering, if maximizing reproductive success is the ultimate goal, why wouldn't a species just have as many babies as biologically possible year after year? Well, it all comes down to a harsh, unbreakable law of nature. Resources are strictly limited. Because energy, food, and time are finite, a species has to make a strict evolutionary trade-off between the sheer number of offspring they produce and the size and robust nature of those offspring. One strategy is to produce a massive volume of tiny offspring. The logic here is just a pure numbers game. By producing thousands or millions of tiny young, you maximize the mathematical probability that at least a few will miraculously survive the extremely high mortality rates they face early in life. The completely opposite strategy is to produce fewer, larger offspring. These offspring benefit from significantly greater parental investment. Because the parents dedicate substantial resources to caring, protecting, feeding, and teaching their young, these larger offspring naturally have vastly improved long-term survival rates.
And this brilliantly illustrates how this plays out in reality. In the wild, marine life like oysters are the undisputed masters of the volume strategy. An oyster will release tens of millions of microscopic eggs directly into the vast water column. There's zero parental care, they're simply rolling the dice, hoping that out of millions, just a fraction will survive the ocean currents, avoid being eaten by filter feeders, and successfully anchor to a reef. On the other hand, terrestrial animals, like the birds and mammals we discussed earlier, fall heavily into the fewer, larger offspring category. An elephant, for instance, endures a pregnancy of nearly 2 years just to produce a single calf, dedicating years afterward to protecting it and teaching it how to survive the savanna. It is intense, highly calculated, quality over sheer quantity.
So, which strategy actually wins? That brings us to Section 4. What shapes these strategies? The environmental referees.
The truth is, there is no single best strategy for maximizing fitness across the board. What works wonders for a salmon or an oyster would be a rapid evolutionary dead end for a bird or a primate. The evolution of these specific life history traits is intricately, permanently shaped by the exact environment a species lives in. First, we have to consider abiotic factors. These are the non-living environmental pressures, and they are massive drivers of adaptation. Just imagine a plant species that lives in a harsh, unforgiving desert where rainfall is wildly unpredictable, sometimes not happening for years at a time. That plant cannot afford a slow, multi-year reproductive cycle. It's adapted to its physical constraints perfectly. The moment an unpredictable rainstorm hits, it rapidly explodes into bloom, sets seed in a matter of days, and goes dormant again. Its strategy is entirely dictated by climate conditions and the chaotic availability of water and resources. Then, we have the biotic, or living, pressures. Interactions with other living things are just as critical in dictating an organism's evolutionary path. Imagine a small prey animal, like a field mouse, living in an ecosystem crawling with owls, snakes, and foxes. The biological math changes drastically here. If statistically you're highly likely to be eaten within your first year of life, evolution naturally pushes you to reproduce as quickly, as early, and as abundantly as possible before your clock runs out. Likewise, heavy competition for territory or food among your own species will force you to adapt highly specific growth timelines just to carve out a niche. The perfect reproductive strategy is molded right in the crucible of these abiotic and biotic factors combined. Let's pan out to the big picture and move to Section 5, why this matters today, from ancient traits to modern ecology, and see how this all builds together.
We aren't just talking about abstract biological concepts or ancient history here. Life history variation is actively at the forefront of modern ecological research. Our source material specifically highlights that understanding these variations has, quote, critical implications for conservation, resource management, and anticipating how species will respond to environmental changes. And this is immensely practical. Think about it from a conservationist perspective. If you're out there trying to save an endangered species, you absolutely have to know its underlying strategy. If you know a species is a slow-reproducing, iteroparous animal that only has one offspring every 3 years, you immediately know it's going to take decades to recover from a population crash caused by habitat loss. Understanding this ancient evolutionary data is the exact key scientists use to accurately model, protect, and manage vulnerable ecosystems in real time today.
So,
I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. As rapid environmental changes fundamentally alter our world today, dramatically shifting those crucial abiotic and biotic factors we just spent time unpacking, how will these ancient evolutionary strategies adapt to survive? I mean, if a stable environment suddenly becomes chaotic, will the slow, steady, repeat breeders find themselves totally outpaced? Will species be forced by brand new pressures to trade their carefully protected size for sheer, desperate quantity? It is a fascinating and incredibly urgent question about the future of Darwinian fitness on our planet. Thank you so much for joining me for this